Welcome back to Andersen Acres. If you love animals, and especially if you love ducks, you've come to the right place because I love them too. It's time to talk about ducks again. So today we're going to talk about one of the biggest concerns for new duck owners, and this is access to water. Do ducks need a natural pond, or can a small pool work just as well? Let's dive in. And this time, I meant to make that pun. Okay, I meant it this time. So, first things first, ducks love water. They love water. It's a huge part of their daily routine. They drink it, they bathe in it, they use it to clean out their eyes and their nostrils. And while having a natural pond might be the ideal setup, it's not always possible. If you're working with limited space or resources, a small pool can be an absolutely perfect alternative. Not all of us have the money, the time, or the inclination to put in an entire pond. And even fewer of us actually have the real space for a pond. A real natural pond takes up a lot of space. So, let's talk about pools as an alternative. When picking a pool, there are a few things to consider. You want to think about size, depth, and durability. Kiddie pools are a cheap and easy option, but they may not last long if you have really active, heavy ducks. Okay, especially if you have like a Muscovy or a Pekin. They can do a lot of damage to those kiddie pools because they go in and out, they smash into the sides, especially if your ducks are breeding. They get really active in the water, I'll say. Well, that's how we'll phrase it. They're pretty darn active in that water, and they can do a lot of damage to the sides of the pool. So kiddie pools are cheap and easy. They're not as durable as you might like. Livestock water troughs are a really good alternative. They're more durable and they have harder sides. They're less likely to tip. They can be more of a drowning hazard if you have other animals like chickens that might get in there and drown because they're so much deeper. So consider that as well. Hard-sided small pond liners can be customized to fit your setup and don't necessarily have to be buried. I like these because these have kind of like shelves, and yeah, you do have to support them because they're designed to be buried, so they do need to be supported under those shelves areas, but because they have those shelves, they're a little bit easier for ducks and other creatures who shouldn't necessarily be in the pond to get in and out. Ideally, you want something deep enough for your ducks to submerge their heads, but you do need shallow areas for ease of access. They do need to be able to get in and out. A duck is not going to be able to get out of a pond or a pool or any body of water that has just a straight hard side. They need some kind of ramp or a lip or a shelf or something. A straight up and down hard side is going to trap them. So consider that before you go out and buy a kiddie pool. Figure out how they're going to get in and out. You don't want to trap your ducks. I know it sounds weird, but ducks can drown. Okay? And so can other animals on your hobby farm. So think about if you have goat kids running around, if you have chickens, if you have rabbits bouncing around, you might want to consider making sure nobody can get stuck in there and drown. So now let's talk about the real challenge with pools. We're not talking about ponds, we're talking about pools. I'm tired. But let's talk about the real challenge involved in pools. Little duck pools. It's going to be keeping the water clean. As we've talked about so many times before, ducks are freaking messy. They like to mix food and mud and whatever else they can find into their water, and it gets really, really gross. They like to poop in their water, and duck poop's already gross. When you mix it into the water that has food and mud and muck in it already, it's even grosser. And it stinks. So, you'll need to change the water regularly because a pool does not have the natural filtration of a natural pond. So you're going to have to take into consideration either filtration or just regular water changes. Just dump it out and refill it every day or two. That's what I like doing with kiddie pools. We have a kiddie pool that we use in the summer. In the winter, it's 40 below. We don't set up the kiddie pool. But we like to use the kiddie pool. It works just fine. It's light enough that we can just tip it over and dump out the water and refill it with fresh water. Honestly, for us, that's the easiest option. Just dump it and refill it. If you have a larger pool that you can't necessarily dump, you'll want to consider adding a small pump or a filter. You might need a small sump pump or a farm pump just to empty it out. It's easier than trying to tip over something that's just too heavy. If you can't tip it, that's okay. You can buy pumps to pump the water out and do water changes that way. Either way, you're going to have to figure out a way to change the water, because when you're dealing with a pool instead of a natural pond, the filtration just isn't there. It's going to be dirty and stinky and gross and unhealthy for both the ducks and all the other animals on the farm and yourself. So you do need to make sure you have a way to change that water. Another thing to keep in mind is safety. We kind of touched on this a couple minutes ago, but unlike natural ponds with their more sloped edges, a lot of pools have really hard, straight sides. Make sure your ducks can get in and out easily. Ramps or shallow steps really do help. Also, in colder months, freezing water is a real danger, especially if you get as cold as we do. So we get 40 below on the regular, and that freezes the water no matter what you do. You can add heaters, it doesn't matter. Your water's going to freeze in our temperatures, so we don't use pools in the winter because it'll freeze solid and the ducks will still try to get in it. And sometimes ducks will sit on water and it'll freeze around them if it gets that cold. So really use your climate as a guide. If you get super cold, take the pools and the ponds and take everything away in the winter. The only thing we could do is a very large natural pond. We could probably keep the water circulating and keep it from freezing, because our lake doesn't freeze. The top does, but the middle doesn't, the bottom doesn't. So we'd have to do a fairly deep, fairly wide pond. We're not going to do that. We do pools, so we take them away in the winter. Consider your climate when you're considering whether or not you should empty the pool for the winter. If you live in the northern areas, you probably should. If it gets really cold, you probably should. But you have to use your own climate as a guide. Remember, ducks are hardy, but ice can be very dangerous, especially if they decide to sit in that pool as the water freezes. They can literally get frozen into the water. So consider your climate before you decide whether or not you're going to empty that pool for the winter. So why would you pick a small pool over a pond? Well, it's easier to set up, easier and cheaper. It's easier to maintain. It's easier to clean because you literally just dump it out, give it a scrub, refill it. It's also more flexible. You can move it around if needed, and you don't have to worry about stagnant water attracting things like mosquitoes. Mosquitoes are a big problem here. We hate mosquitoes so much. But sometimes a pond can be a little bit stagnant, or it'll have stagnant areas that allow mosquitoes to lay their eggs, and then the babies hatch, and then you're overrun with mosquitoes. With a pool, you can do regular water changes and keep that water fresh so that there's no chance for mosquito larvae to hatch and mature. That really makes a difference if you have a problem with mosquitoes. Also, pools are a good option if you're on a budget. Let's face it, most of us are. Most of us don't have unlimited money in our pockets, so most of us are going to be looking for a cheaper option, and a pool is so much cheaper than a pond. Do ducks need a natural pond? No, of course not. While they love having one, a small pool will work just as well. With the right setup and the right maintenance, do not let anyone tell you any different. Do not let anyone tell you that you can't have ducks just because you don't have the room for a natural pond. Ducks can adapt. They can handle just having a pool or having a splash pad or whatever you are able to provide. The key is making sure they always have clean access to fresh water. Okay? So you're going to have to clean it out. You're going to have to change it. You're going to have to spray things down. But as long as they have access to fresh, clean water, you're generally fine. So what do you use for your ducks? Do you use a pond? Do you use a pool? Do you use a splash pad? Let me know in the comments below. That's about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. We'll see you tomorrow.